Hello, hope you're having a wonderful day. We are in the book of Mark, and we are ready to read chapter 14. Now, we are reading for, as always, we are reading for context to understand events, what's happening, and learn what we can learn from those, and also understand what is being said, and to apply that to our lives as much as is possible. Alright, so we had just read, let me flip back at 13 here. Jesus was talking to the disciples, and he was telling them, no one knows the day or the hour that he would come, and to make sure that we stay awake. In other words, stay alert and aware that Jesus could return at any time. Pardon me, I was just having a little something to drink there to keep myself wet there. So, like I said, we are at chapter 14 and verse 1. Going to start there. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." So their only concern here, this is no, it's not kind of sad, it's really sad. Their only concern was that they would get in trouble with the people. Other than that, they wanted to secretly arrest him and kill him. If he was truly doing something wrong, they would have done this openly. And if he wasn't, then they wouldn't do this at all, really. They shouldn't do it at all. That's what I should say, is they shouldn't do it at all. Anyway, sometimes these things, real life kind of gets to me, and I'm like, here they were like trying to see how to arrest him and kill him, and they wanted to do it secretly, but they didn't want to do it during the feast because there would be an uproar from the people, because they knew Jesus was a famous person, and it said so earlier in the book of Mark, and he was famous and well known, and they knew that the people believed him to be from God. Alright, so I'm going to try to keep us scrolled down appropriately as much as I can. Alright, verse 3, "And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, 'Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor.' And they scolded her." See, it was not unusual for Jesus and his disciples for them to give to the poor or to help the poor. That was not an unusual thing for them. They did that, and we should do that. And I'm just going to assume that most of us do. We do things like that whenever, when we can, as we can, and we should. All right, continuing on, verse 6. "But Jesus said, 'Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her.'" As we know, that's true. This is at least the second place where this is told of her. So, and Jesus is, letting them know that, he had just told them that he was, he had already told them that he was going to, be killed and rose and buried and rise again. So, so here he's just telling them that she was doing something good for him, because he was going to die and be buried. So he fussed at him a little bit. It doesn't look too bad, but a little bit. "Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them, and when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now, I don't know why this occurs in this order like this, unless somehow Judas saw this and he was really offended by it, what the woman had done, and the fact that Jesus said, don't trouble her, leave her alone. Maybe Judas had some trouble believing or understanding why that would be okay. But I don't know. It just seems like that may have been a trigger. There's no guarantee though. Then verse 12. And on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, The teacher says, Where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. There prepare for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city, and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. So here Jesus knew ahead of time where to go and where someone would be ready and waiting. This was all, it kind of just demonstrates more how everything was all prepared and how he was on the correct path and doing what he knew he was going to do, what he needed to do. And when it was evening, he came with the 12, and as they were reclining at table and eating, Jesus said, Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They began to be sorrowful, and to say to him one after another, Is it I? He said to them, It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. So there, I don't know. I wonder, I wonder sometimes how that was for Judas, and how he could be at that point where he thought that was a good idea to betray Jesus, and that, I don't know, and this sounds like a warning that would have got his attention, but it didn't. Anyway, verse 22, And as they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to them, and said, Take, this is my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. So here's a short version of the establishment of the Lord's Supper. And it is just representative of what we do. Well, we do this every week. Now, some people do it once a month, and some people do it less than that. I think it is no matter how often you do it, and not in this gospel, but in other gospels, Jesus says, as often as you do it. He doesn't really put a time limit on it. One example that's noted, I think, in Acts was that they seem to believe that example, and when we get there, we'll make sure that it was an established practice that the disciples did it once a week on the Lord's Day, and that would make sense. So I've never had any problem with that, but I'm just saying when we read there, we will confirm all of that. But I don't see anything wrong with doing it. I wouldn't see anything wrong with doing it daily if you felt that would help you and you needed to do that daily to stay close with God. There would be no harm in that. Anyway, it's an important thing, the Lord's Supper, to partake of that and to remember Jesus' sacrifice, the reason this was done, and the reason we do that. It's really totally for us, even though we honor and remember Jesus. It's really totally for us. He instituted this because he knew we needed that. We need to remind ourselves and remember his sacrifice. And if we don't, it's just like reading your Bible. If you're not reading your Bible every day, if you're not partaking of the Lord's Supper regularly and often to remind yourself, then it's easy to let it slip away, let it slip out of your mind. It's easy to drift off into the world, and it's hard. You really have to be diligent. That's I think that's what Paul says back in some of the epistles too, is we really have to be diligent to stay with it and to keep going and to not let ourselves be drifted off. I know even just one day where I don't do like I should do, I can drift off course and do some wrong things, or just do something incorrect, and that's not good. So anyway, just saying as an example. Verse 26. And when they had sung a hymn, now notice, after they ate, they sung a hymn, which is really cool. Now they had a real meal. Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, which we do as like a little memorial service, and we don't eat a whole meal, and we don't drink a big glass of juice or wine, but we do it as a little ceremony. And then, but they actually ate a whole meal, and then they sang a hymn. And I think there's other times when it's mentioned that in some of the gatherings that they sang hymns, but we'll see when we read through the epistles and in Acts. Okay, so again, verse 26. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, Even though they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus said to him, Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, If I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. But Jesus was not wrong, of course. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what was supposed to happen. And he knew what would happen. So it's not that it couldn't be changed or that it was unchangeable. It's just, it's like our lives. Our lives are not unchangeable. We have free will and can choose whatever we do. But he knew, being God in the flesh, he knew what would occur. Okay, so continuing on with verse 32, and they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. Pardon me. And he said to them, My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. This is such a good example that we should all follow, because there's so many things in life that we don't want to deal with or have to do or whatever. But sometimes we just have to do it anyway. And he sets the perfect example. Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this from me. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And they had all fallen asleep here. And he had just asked them to watch while he prayed. But you know how it is, especially when it's getting late at night and you've ate and you're feeling whatever, and you just I don't know if it was as real to them as it was to him what was going to happen, because even though he had told them, some part of them may not have believed that it was actually going to go down that way, And like I say, he was their friend, and as well as being the Messiah and God in the flesh, he was also their friend. So for them, it was a slightly different situation than it is for us. Well, actually, I guess that's probably vastly different in a way. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. So even as he said, all of them fell away, and left him to be taken off. I mean, of course it was scary for them, and there was a crowd of people, and I'm sure, with clubs, with swords and clubs, I'm sure that was scary. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. This is one of those things that I'm not sure what that pertains to. Now, I've heard someone give a whole lesson on this, and it was very good. I cannot, however, remember that lesson that well, and so I cannot tell you. I seem to think at the time that the person giving the lesson, thought that might have been Mark himself, and that he followed Jesus and he tried to follow him, but they seized him and he left the linen cloth and ran away naked like it was himself. But I don't know that. I'm trying to remember what that person, they had done a good lesson on that, and they knew, they seemed to know, I'll say that, because I haven't read anything that really tells who this is or what this is yet, but it may appear in one of the next two Gospels. So for now, let's leave that a mystery, and we're going to continue our reading, because like I said, I don't want to say or do things that end up being wrong. So we're going to stick with that just being as that's an accounting of something that happened. We did not read that in Matthew, but if this was Mark, or if it was just somebody that Mark knew or Mark saw, then that's different. Alright, so then we have verse 53. Of course, they have Jesus arrested. This is a big chapter, so bear with me. We're going to keep going. We're not going to quit. And a young man followed him. No, I'm sorry. Wrong verse. Let me move down so I get to the right verse, because we're on verse 53. Okay. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. Now that I expected. I knew Peter had followed him. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Pardon me. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest, my page is stuck together, pardon me. we will make sure we read this as best as possible. Okay, verse 60. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his garments and said, "What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. So these were the leaders. These were the high priests and the chief priests and the elders, and they were treating him that way. I mean, really, there's no reason to treat anyone that way, even if they have done something wrong. I mean, that just there's no reason for that. Anyway, if somebody's broken the law, you arrest them, you take them and put them in jail or do whatever you need to do, but you don't do that. Anyway, every time I read that surprises me that they acted that way. I'm sorry. Verse 66, and as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. And that was very sad for him, because he had been so adamant that he would not fall away and he would not leave Jesus. But at the same time, he still had the same human feelings that any of us would have. He was scared. They were all scared. But you notice, he's the only one we know of that actually followed Jesus. Even he, as bold as he was, denied Jesus like Jesus said, but even he did not really, stand up with Jesus, but he did follow him. So, alright, so that's the end of this chapter. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless you.